Now we will examine more closely operant conditioning. Topics you may find rewarding: Skinner's experiments in shaping behavior, types of reinforcers, positive and negative, primary and conditioned, immediate versus delayed, reinforcement schedules, punishment, positive and negative, the downsides of punishment, applications of operant conditioning, operant versus classical conditioning revisited. Operant conditioning. Operant conditioning involves adjusting to the consequences of our behaviors. Examples: we may smile more at work after this repeatedly gets us bigger tips. We learn how to ride a bike using the strategies that don't make us crash. How it works: an act of chosen behavior, a response, is followed by a reward or punitive feedback from the environment. Results: reinforced behavior is more likely to be tried again. So we behave a certain way. If it gets reinforced, we're more likely to do that behavior again. Or we do a behavior, it can be punished. Punished behavior is less likely to be chosen in the future. So, response: balancing the ball. When the sea lion balances a ball, then it receives food. Therefore, the bouncing ball behavior is going to be strengthened. This is a sign of reinforcement. Now, let's look at Thorndike's law of effect. Edward Thorndike placed cats in a puzzle box. They were rewarded with food and freedom when they solved the puzzle. Thorndike noted that the cats took less time to escape after repeated trials and rewards. This resulted in Thorndike's law of effect. And it reads like this: behaviors followed by favorable consequences become more likely, and behaviors followed by unfavorable consequences become less likely. Thorndike's law of effect is very critical to the whole idea of operant conditioning. B.F. Skinner saw potential for exploring and using Edward Thorndike's principles much more broadly. He wondered the following: how can we more carefully measure the effect of consequences on chosen behavior? What else can creatures be taught to do by controlling the consequences? What happens when we change the timing of the reinforcement? So, B.F. Skinner wanted to open up the world of possibilities based on Edward Thorndike's law of effect, looking at behavioral control. B.F. Skinner trained pigeons to play ping pong and guide video game missiles. So the idea here is he wanted to expand the possibilities based on Thorndike's law of effect. B.F. Skinner then developed the operant chamber. Very much like Ivan Pavlov, he pioneered more controlled methods of studying conditioning. The operant chamber, often called the Skinner box, allowed detailed tracking of rates of behavior change in response to different rates of reinforcement. So what would happen here? You'd see food would be dispensed. We have this bar. The bar or lever that the animal presses randomly at first, but later for a reward. So they press the bar, and then they will either get a food or water dispensed to them as a reward for their behavior. These actions and their reinforcements and their behaviors would be recorded, so they would be able to analyze the results and see what types of rewards or reinforcers would make the behavior more reliable, more consistent, or more powerful. So let's look at reinforcement. Reinforcement: feedback from the environment that makes a behavior more likely to be done again. Feedback from the environment that makes a behavior more likely to be done again. reinforcement. Positive reinforcement. Positive is the reward is adding something desirable. Now, we know what positive and negative means in everyday life, but I want to give you a slightly different definition here as we're talking about operant conditioning. So here, positive means we add something. That's the key thing. We're adding something. But when we talk about negative, we're talking about ending or taking something away. So positive reinforcement, the reward is adding something desirable. And negative reinforcement, the reward is ending something unpleasant. So if you add something desirable, you're more likely to do that behavior that got you that more desirable stuff. If we have negative reinforcement, we're ending something that we don't like, something that's unpleasant. Whatever led to ending something that is unpleasant, we're more likely to do that behavior too. That's also reinforcement. Again, remember what the definition is. Feedback from the environment that makes a behavior more likely to be done again. So if you want to get something desirable, we do that thing that got us that desirable thing. If we want to end something unpleasant, we do that thing that helped us to end that thing that was unpleasant. Positive and negative. So this meerkat has just completed a task out in the cold. For the meerkat, this warm light is desirable. So whatever leads to that warm light being turned on again, he's more likely to do that behavior in the future. That would be something that is desirable, and that would be indicative of positive reinforcement. Another concept is called shaping behavior, or reinforcing successive approximations. Shaping, guiding a creature toward the behavior by reward behavior that comes closer and closer to the desired behavior. So in this little example, you can see the photograph here, shaping the teacher. Students could smile and nod more when the instructor moves to the left until the instructor stays pinned to the left wall. Think about what this means. Instructors normally are going to look for feedback from their students when they're teaching a class face to face. When they see students nod their heads and smile, they are going to be giving feedback to the instructor that's very positive, very reinforcing. Whatever you're doing, we're getting it and we're understanding it. So each time the instructor would move a little bit to the left, that's when they would nod more and smile more. Therefore, each time it would be shaping the instructor's behavior until they get all the way to the left side of the room. Also, let's look at a cycle of mutual reinforcement. Some of you may have some experience with this more so than others. Children who have a temper tantrum when they are frustrated may get positively reinforced for this behavior when parents occasionally respond by giving in to the child's demands. The kid acts up, acts out, and then you do whatever it is they wanted you to do. That's positively reinforcing that temper tantrum behavior. Stronger, more frequent tantrums would result from that. Parents who occasionally give in to tantrums may get negatively reinforced when the child responds by ending the tantrum. Okay, remember, negative reinforcement, when there is something that is going on that is undesirable for the organism, and we do a behavior that leads to that undesirable situation to become to an end, that is very reinforcing. So in this example, parents who occasionally give in to the tantrums may get negatively reinforced when the child responds by ending the tantrum. The result, parents giving in behavior is strengthened, given in sooner and more often in the future. Now, let's look at discrimination from the perspective of operant conditioning. Discrimination, the ability to become more and more specific in what situations trigger a response. Shaping can increase discrimination if reinforcement only comes for certain discriminative stimuli. For example, dogs, rats, and even spiders can be trained to search for very specific smells, from drugs to explosives. Pigeons, seals, and manatees have been trained to respond to specific shapes, colors, and categories. So they're conditioned to respond to one particular type of shape and not others, to one specific type of smell of a drug and not others. They're learning to discriminate the stimuli, some of which they get reinforced for, some not so. Why we might work for money. If we repeatedly introduce a neutral stimulus before a reinforcer, this stimulus acquires the power to be used as a reinforcer. Again, if we repeatedly introduce a neutral stimulus before a reinforcer, this stimulus acquires the power to be used as a reinforcer. A primary reinforcer is a stimulus that meets a basic need or otherwise is intrinsically desirable, such as food, sex, fun, attention, or power. Primary reinforcers. These things are naturally reinforcing to us. We don't have to learn them. A secondary or conditioned reinforcer is a stimulus such as a rectangle piece of paper with numbers on it, money, which has become associated with a primary reinforcer. Money buys food, builds power, and so on. So the idea is this: money in and of itself, cash in and of itself, has no real value to us as organisms. What does have value are the primary reinforcer items, things such as food and sex, fun and attention and power. Those things are naturally reinforcing to us. We have to learn the value of the money because it is a secondary or conditioned reinforcer. If you give a young child $100 bills or a chocolate bar, they may drop the $100 bill and open the chocolate bar and begin eating it because they have yet to learn the secondary or conditioned reinforcer power of money. In that instance, the chocolate bar, which is food, serves as a primary reinforcer because it meets a basic need. Now, there's another item too that should be examined: a human talent, responding to delayed reinforcers. Dogs learn from immediate reinforcement. A treat 5 minutes after a trick won't reinforce the trick. That's why you've probably heard that if a dog is to be punished or rewarded, they need to be done. It needs to be done immediately, not after some time has elapsed. Dogs learn from immediate reinforcement. Humans have the ability to link a consequence to a behavior even if they aren't linked sequentially in time. So we have the benefit of understanding and be reinforced by delayed reinforcers. We don't have to have it happen to us immediately. A piece of paper, a paycheck, can be a delayed reinforcer, paid a month later if we link it to our performance. So we get that check at the end of the month for the work that we previously did that month. It's still reinforcing to us. We still can make that connection, unlike a dog. Delaying gratification, a skill related to impulse control, enables longer term goal setting. So, by us being able to do this, delaying reinforcers, we can use certain types of things to help set goals for us that will be long term goals. How often should we reinforce? Do we need to give a reward every single time? Or is that even best? B.F. Skinner experimented with the effects of giving reinforcements in different patterns, or what he referred to as schedules, to determine what worked best to establish and maintain a target behavior. In continuous reinforcement, that is, given a reward after the target every single time, the subject acquires the desired behavior quickly. In partial or intermittent reinforcement, given rewards part of the time, not every single time, but only part of the time, the target behavior takes longer to be acquired and established, but persists longer without reward. So let's back up a little bit. In continuous reinforcement, you do a behavior and you get the reward immediately every single time. As soon as people stop rewarding you with behavior, that behavior is going to quickly die away. It will become extinguished because you know you're no longer getting reinforced for it. But in partial or intermittent reinforcement, we only get the reward only sometimes after that behavior. Okay, so the target behavior takes longer to acquire and to become established, but it will last longer, meaning that you can go a period of time without getting reinforced, but you still will be controlled in some sense by that reinforcement schedule. The next time you do it, you might get rewarded, for example. So let's look at different schedules of partial or intermittent reinforcement. So we know what continuous reinforcement is. Every time we do a behavior, we get reinforced for that behavior. So when the reinforcement stops, we notice it immediately. So with intermittent or partial reinforcement schedules, that's not exactly going to be the case. We may schedule our reinforcements based on an interval of time that has gone by. We may plan for a certain ratio of rewards per number of instances of the desired behavior. So we have fixed interval schedule or variable interval schedule. A fixed interval schedule is you'll get the reward ever so often at a certain amount of time, a fixed time interval. The variable interval schedule is still based on time, but it's going to be unpredictably often. So you can't really figure out how often you're going to get it. So that's a fixed interval schedule based on time or a variable interval schedule based on time. Let me give you an example. You could get the reward every 5 minutes. If you do the behavior, you get it every 5 minutes. Or you can get it on average every 5 minutes. Sometimes that may mean that you get it after 2 minutes. Sometimes it may be 10 minutes. Just so the average is going to be 5 minutes. That leads to it being very unpredictable as how often you're going to get it. Or we can base it on amount. So we can have a fixed ratio schedule. Every so many behaviors. Every 10th time you get reinforced. Every 7th time you get reinforced. Or a variable ratio schedule after, again, an unpredictable number of behaviors. Sometimes you get reinforced 5 times after you do the behavior. You do it 6 times, you get reinforced, and so on. As long as the average is something, but we can't predict when it's going to occur. Let's look at some examples. Which schedule of reinforcement is this? Ratio, interval, fixed, or variable? I'll go through them rather quickly here. Rat gets food every 3rd time it presses the lever. That is a fixed ratio. Getting paid weekly no matter how much work is done. Fixed interval. Getting paid for every 10 boxes you make. Fixed ratio. Hitting a jackpot sometimes on the slot machine. Variable ratio. Winning sometimes on the lottery you play once a day. That could be variable interval or variable ratio. Checking cell phone all day, sometimes getting a text. Variable interval. Buy 8 pizzas, get the next one free. Fixed ratio. Fundraiser averages 1 donation for every 8 houses visited. Variable ratio. Kid has tantrum, parents sometimes give in. Variable ratio. And 10, repeatedly checking mail until paycheck arrives. Fixed interval. So we see these somewhat real-world examples of the types of schedules we can be on by way of reinforcement, from fixed ratio to variable ratio to fixed interval, variable interval. Okay, now each one of these sort of tells us a little bit about how the behavior and how certain things will play out when you're on these types of schedules of reinforcement. So results of the different schedules of reinforcement. Which reinforcements produce more responding, more target behavior? Fixed interval, slow, unsustained responding. If I'm only paid for my Saturday work, I'm not going to work as hard on the other days. It's sort of like a scallop here on a clamshell. Rapid responding near the time of reinforcement. So you can see the behavior goes up just before they get the reinforcement. And the hash marks here represents when you get the reinforcement. This is a fixed interval schedule. The variable interval, slow, consistent responding. If I never know which day my lucky lottery number will pay off, I better play it every single day. So you can see with the variable interval schedule, it's a steady line up. Each one of these hash marks represents a reinforcement. But the behavior is very consistent, unlike what we saw with the fixed interval schedule. Not so consistent, they work harder closer to the time of reinforcement for the fixed interval. But for the variable interval, it's very steady responding. Now let's look at the fixed ratio. A high rate of responding. Buy 2 drinks, get 1 free. I'll buy a lot of them. So you know what to expect here. The hash marks again represent the reinforcement. It's a very consistent, high rate of responding. It's like the 10th sub. You buy 9 subs, you get the 10th sub free, that type of thing. A fixed ratio. High rate of responding is usually the behavioral pattern that we'll see. Then we have the variable ratio. High, consistent responding, even if reinforcement stops. This one resists extinction. If the slot machine sometimes pays, I'll pull that lever as many times as possible because it may pay this time. Now let's look a little bit more closely at this variable ratio schedule. That's the one that's green. It's very steep. But look at the hash marks here when the reinforcements actually occur. There's a long span of time from the second reinforcement to the third reinforcement. But behavior is still rather consistently strong. That is the power of a variable ratio schedule. It is going to be high consistent behavior. The organism will press that lever, whatever the behavior is, they'll keep doing that behavior. And it can go a long time without getting reinforced, and therefore it's going to be resistance to extinction. Now let's look at the other aspect of operant conditioning. So we've talked about reinforcement. Now we're going to talk a little bit about punishment. Punishments have the opposite effects of reinforcement. These consequences make the target behavior less likely to occur in the future. Positive punishment. You add something unpleasant or aversive, like spanking the child. Positive punishment. Adding something undesirable or aversive. Negative punishment. You take away something pleasant or desired. For example, no TV time, no attention. Okay, you take away someone's freedom, they're grounded. Negative punishment. All right, you take away something they desire, something that they want. So positive does not mean good or desirable, and negative does not mean bad or undesirable. Again, positive, you're adding something, and negative, you're taking something away or subtracting something. When is punishment effective? Punishment works best in natural setting when we encounter punishing consequences from actions such as reaching into a fire. In that case, operant conditioning helps us to avoid dangers. Punishment is less effective when we try to artificially create punishing consequences for others' choices. Severity of punishment is not as helpful as making the punishments immediate and certain. So by spanking somebody harder, okay, that's not going to be helpful. What's going to be more helpful is making sure that when they do something that's worth punishing, that the punishment is going to be immediate and you cannot avoid it. It will be certain. Applying operant conditioning to parenting. Problems with physical punishment. And obviously, there are going to be many. Punished behaviors may simply be suppressed and restart when the punishment is over. So you punish somebody's behavior, then once the punishment is over, they're more likely or possibly more likely to do that behavior again. It only suppresses the behavior. It does not prevent it. Instead of learning behaviors, the child may learn to discriminate among situations and avoid those in which punishment might occur. Therefore, they can do certain behaviors around mother, but maybe not father. So instead of learning behaviors, the child simply learns to discriminate among situations and avoid those in which punishment might occur, or otherwise they might get caught. In other words, instead of behaviors, the child might learn an attitude of fear or hatred, which can interfere with learning. This can generalize to a fear or hatred of all adults or many settings. Physical punishment models aggression and control as a method of dealing with problems. Don't think about the beach. Don't think about the waves, the sand, the towels, and sunscreen, the sailboats, the surfboards. Don't think about the beach. Are you obeying the instructions? Would you obey this instruction more if you were punished for thinking about the beach? Some things are going to be very difficult to try to accomplish. The problem, punishing focuses on what not to do, which does not guide people to a desired behavior. Even if undesirable behaviors do stop, another problem behavior may emerge that serves the same purpose, especially if no replacement behaviors are taught and reinforced. So the lesson is this. In order to teach desired behavior, reinforce what's right more often than punishing what's wrong. More effective forms of operant conditioning, the power of rephrasing. Positive punishment. You're playing video games instead of practicing the piano, so I'm justified in yelling at you. Negative punishment. You are avoiding practice, so I'm turning off the game. Negative reinforcement. I will stop staring at you and bugging you as soon as I see that you are practicing. Positive reinforcement. After you practice, we'll play a game. So these are things that can go along with the operant conditioning of punishing someone or reinforcing something. You're using the power of rephrasing and phrasing to communicate what exactly is going on when it comes to the behaviors. The summary and types of consequences. So we have adding stimuli, subtracting stimuli, and the outcome. A positive reinforcement, we add you're getting candy. A negative reinforcement, I'll stop yelling. So think about this. We're adding something that is desirable, a desirable stimuli by getting candy, or stopping something which is unpleasant, an unpleasant stimuli by stop yelling. What these both do, they strengthen the target behaviors. So you could either get candy for doing your chores, or I'll stop yelling at you if you do your chores, strengthening the behavior. The next one, positive punishment, you get spanked. Negative punishment, no cell phone. So the idea here is that if you are cursing, you can get spanked for cursing, hopefully reducing the target behavior. Or if you are cursing, you lose something that you desire, your cell phone. So let's look at the legacy of B.F. Skinner's ideas and works. The way to modify behavior is through consequences. This leaves out the value of instruction and modeling. So we take it a little bit further by giving them a little bit more modeling behaviors. Behavior is influenced by external feedback, not by thoughts and feelings. Adult humans have the ability to use thinking to make choices and plans. We should intentionally create consequences to shape the behavior of others. Natural consequences are more justifiable than manipulation of others. Humanity improves through conscious reinforcement of positive behavior and the punishment of bad behavior. Humanity improves through free choice guided by wisdom, conscience, and responsibility. Applications of operant conditioning. School, long before tablet computers, B.F. Skinner proposed machines that would reinforce students for correct responses, allowing students to improve at different rates and work on different learning goals. Another application, sports. Athletes improve most in the shaping approach in which they are reinforced for performance that comes closer and closer to the target skill, hitting pitches that are progressively faster, for example. And we see it also at work. Some companies make pay a function of performance or company profit rather than seniority. They target specific behaviors to reinforce. More operant conditioning applications in parenting. Rewarding small improvements toward desired behaviors works better than expecting complete success, and also works better than punishing problem behaviors. Giving in to temper tantrums stops them in the short run, but increases them in the long run. Self-improvement. Reward yourself for steps you take toward your goals. As you establish good habits, then make your rewards more infrequent or intermittent. Contrasting the types of conditioning. Classical conditioning, the basic idea is associating events or stimuli with each other. Operant conditioning, associating a chosen behavior with resulting events or the consequences. Response. In classical conditioning, response is involuntary automatic reactions such as salivating. In operant conditioning, the response is voluntary actions operating on our environment. Acquisition. In classical conditioning, it is the neutral stimulus linked to the unconditioned stimulus by repeatedly presenting the NS before the US. In operant conditioning, the behavior is associated with punishment or reinforcement. Extinction. In classical conditioning, the conditioned response decreases when the conditioned stimulus is repeatedly presented alone. In operant conditioning, the target behavior decreases when reinforcement stops. Spontaneous recovery. In classical conditioning, extinguished conditioned response starts again after a rest period. In operant conditioning, the extinguished response starts again after a reset or a rest or no reward. Generalization. Classical conditioning. When the conditioned response is triggered by stimuli similar to the conditioned stimulus. Generalization and operant conditioning. Response behavior similar to that reinforced behavior. Indiscrimination. Distinguish between a conditioned stimulus and a neutral stimulus not linked to the unconditioned stimulus. Discrimination and operant conditioning. Distinguishing what will get reinforced and what will not get reinforced. Now let's look briefly at the effects of biology and cognition in learning by observation. Topics you can learn with the help of your body, thinking, and observation, biological constraints on conditioning, cognitive processes and conditioning, learning by observation, prosocial and antisocial effects. So The summary of factors affecting learning. We have biological influences, genetic predispositions, unconditioned responses, adaptive responses. We have psychological influences, previous experiences, predictability of associations, generalization and discrimination, social cultural influences, culturally learned preferences, motivation affected by the presence of others. Now, biology influences on conditioning. Real quickly, classical conditioning. John Garcia and others found that it was easier to learn associations that make sense for survival. So we're sort of already pre-programmed to learn certain types of conditioning because they aid us in our survival. Food aversions can be acquired even if the unconditioned response, the nausea, does not immediately follow the neutral stimulus. When acquiring food aversions during pregnancy or illness, the body associates nausea with whatever food was eaten. So the idea is that even though we may get sick after eating some sort of novel food hours and hours later, we still will associate it even though it's not immediate. Why? Because this can aid in our survival long term. The role of biology in conditioning, operant conditioning. Can a monkey be trained to peck with its nose? No, but a pigeon can, because that's a type of behavior that it naturally does already. Can a pigeon be trained to dive underwater? No, but a dolphin can. Operant conditioning encounters biological tendencies and limits that are difficult to override. What can we most easily train a dog to do based on their natural tendencies? Detecting scents, climbing and bouncing, putting on clothes. Well, obviously, the one there is going to be detecting scents because dogs really do like to smell. So we see there are cognitive processes and conditioning. When the dog salivates at the bell, it may be due to cognition, learning to predict, even expect the food. Knowing that our reactions are caused by conditioning gives us the option of mentally breaking the association. For example, deciding that nausea associated with a food aversion was actually caused by an illness, for example. In operant conditioning, in a fixed interval reinforcement schedule, animals do more target behaviors or responses around the time that the reward is more likely, as if expecting the reward. Expectation as a cognitive skill is even more evident in the ability of humans to respond to delayed reinforcers such as a paycheck. Please note that I have skipped a few slides on latent learning and rewards and motivation, so be sure to review those when you get a chance. So, learning by observation. Can we, like the rats exploring the maze with no reward, learn new behaviors and skills without direct experience of conditioning? Yes, and one of the ways we do so is by observational learning, watching what happens when other people do a behavior and learning from their experience. Skills required: mirroring, being able to picture ourselves doing that same action, and cognition, noticing consequences and associations. The observational learning process, modeling. The behavior of others serves as a model, an example of how to respond to a situation. We may try this model regardless of reinforcement. Then we have vicarious conditioning. Vicarious, experienced indirectly through others. Vicarious reinforcement and punishment means our choices are affected as we see others get consequences for their behaviors. So if you see your slightly older brother when you were kids get punished for doing something, you're less likely to do that something or that behavior that led to your older brother's punishment. Albert Bandura's Bobo doll experiment done in 1961. We discussed this previously. But kids saw adults punching an inflated doll while narrating their aggressive behaviors such as kick him. These kids were then put in a toy deprived situation and acted out the same behaviors they had seen. So, in essence, this is sort of indicating that they learned the behavior through observational learning by looking at the adults model these types of behaviors. What is going on to some degree? We have mirroring that occurs in the brain. When we watch others doing or feeling something, neurons fire in patterns that would fire if we were doing the action or having the feeling ourselves. So, in the left image, we see someone experiencing some pain. The person's brain on the right side are them having empathy for that person's pain. So you can see the empathy or the emotional centers are lit up on the right image, but at the top of the brain, the somatosensory areas are not lit up. That is the person actually feeling the pain on the left. But we don't have the corresponding lit up brain in that area at all because we're not experiencing the pain, but we're experiencing the emotionality of it. So these neurons are referred to as mirror neurons, and they fire only to reflect the actions or feelings of others. So humans are prone to spontaneous imitation of both behaviors and emotions. Emotions can be somewhat contagious. This includes even over imitating, that is, copying adult behaviors that have no function and no reward. Sometimes you can see children do this, they just start to over imitate individuals and people. Children with autism are less likely to cognitively mirror and less likely to follow someone else's gaze, as a neurotypical toddler left is doing below. Pro-social effects of observational learning. Pro-social behavior refers to actions which benefit others, contribute value to groups, and follow moral codes and social norms. Parents try to teach this behavior through lectures, but it may be taught best through modeling. So if you want them to be somewhat more giving, show your children that you're donating your time, going to soup kitchens, going out to help out at homeless shelters and things of that nature. So especially if kids can see the benefits of the behavior to oneself or others, it's quite beneficial. But at the same time, antisocial effects of observational learning does occur as well. Basically, we can see someone mimicking antisocial behaviors. Someone who gets spanked or has physical abuse in the household, you may see children start to act those things out. They witness violence and then they mimic the violence themselves. Very similar to what we saw in the Bobo doll experiments. And finally, we see the following. Media models of violence. Do we learn antisocial behaviors such as violence from indirect observations of others in the media? Well, do we? Research shows that viewing media violence leads to increased aggression, fight, and reduced pro-social behavior such as helping an injured person. This violence viewing effect may be explained by imitation and also by desensitization toward pain in others. So that gives us a really good idea of a lot of the ideas associated with learning.